Okay, so this is the second part of chapter 44. Mhm. And I need to change, let me see. Let me just look at the sharing my screen and see, make sure all the settings are right. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and get here. So bottom line is this. 1,600 liters of blood flows through parahuman kidneys each day. Okay, so it's quite a bit of blood. Remember, think of it as a 2 liter. So we're talking 800 2 liter bottles. Okay. But only about 1.5 liters of urine is actually transported to the bladder. You only produce about 1 or 2 liters of urine a day. Okay. Basically, that means all of it is reabsorbed. Almost all of it's reabsorbed. So in the proximal tubule, that's this part here, proximal, you get reabsorption of iron, ions, water, and nutrients. Okay. They're transported actively and passively. Um, and then what happens is that as the filtrate goes through, it becomes more and more concentrated. Okay. Then you've got the descending loop of Henle. Okay. And in the descending loop, you actually have reabsorption of water. When water gets reabsorbed, that means it goes out of the tubule and back into the bloodstream, which means that when there's more water being reabsorbed, that means that, excuse me, that the concentration gets higher and higher until it reaches the tip of the loop of Henle. Okay. As it goes, so the tip is the highest concentration of filtrate at that point. Okay. Now, as it goes up the ascending loop of Henle, excuse me, salt is able to be reabsorbed, but water stays in there. When salt gets reabsorbed and water stays in there, then the filtrate becomes more dilute, and then it gets up here and it becomes dilute again. Excuse me. And then you also have some shifting of potassium, sodium, chloride ions, and also movement of hydrogen and bicarbonate ions. Excuse me. So, anyway, the interesting thing about urine is that it is hyperosmotic to body fluids. In other words, it has a higher concentration compared to normal body fluids. So, this is just kind of showing you what's going on. Again, if it's going into the tubule, that means it is being secreted. If it is leaving the tubule, that means it's going into the bloodstream and being reabsorbed. Now, let's go ahead and watch this video here. Optimize it. Okay.
Nephrons regulate the composition of blood by a combination of three processes that transfer materials between the nephron tubules and the capillaries that serve them: filtration, secretion, and reabsorption. A nephron tubule and the blood
Okay, we already saw filtration. Let's get to reabsorption and secretion. Okay, here we go.
certain substances are transported from the blood and added to the filtrate, a process called secretion. Secretion of hydrogen ions helps to regulate body pH. Certain poisons are also secreted to remove them from the blood. This list summarizes substances contained in the filtrate. Filtration is not selective, so some of these substances are useful to the body, and it is important that they be returned to the blood. The kidneys generally need to recover water, sodium chloride, bicarbonate ions, and nutrients such as glucose and amino acids. This reclamation of valuable solutes in water is called reabsorption. Let's look at the process of reabsorption as the filtrate continues its journey through the nephron tubule. In the proximal tubule, reabsorption of bicarbonate ions helps regulate the blood's pH. Sodium chloride, glucose, and amino acids are actively transported out of the filtrate. This leaves the filtrate more dilute than the surrounding interstitial fluid, so water follows by osmosis. These solutes and water re-enter the blood.
Okay.
As the filtrate moves down the loop of Henle, the concentration of solutes increases in the interstitial fluid surrounding the nephron tubule. Since this portion of the tubule is permeable to water, water leaves by osmosis and is reabsorbed into the blood. This concentrates the filtrate. In the ascending loop, the surrounding fluid becomes more dilute. This portion of the loop is impermeable to water but not sodium chloride. Sodium chloride diffuses out, lowering the solute concentration of the filtrate and adding to the solute concentration of the surrounding fluid. Near the top of the loop, sodium chloride is actively transported out, further diluting the filtrate. More substances are reabsorbed from the distal tubule. Sodium chloride is actively transported out of the filtrate. Bicarbonate ions may be reabsorbed too, helping to regulate body pH. Some drugs and poisons are secreted from the blood into the filtrate at this point. And this is another place where hydrogen ions may also be secreted into the filtrate to further adjust pH. There is a lot going on here. The main point is that the nephron is able to expel unneeded or harmful substances from the blood by filtration and secretion into the filtrate, and the nephron can reabsorb substances useful to the body. The filtrate enters the collecting duct. As it moves down the collecting duct, it passes through a region where the surrounding fluid has a higher and higher solute concentration. Water leaves the collecting duct by osmosis, concentrating the remaining filtrate into urine. Urea is one of the main body wastes in urine, but here some urea actually diffuses out of the filtrate. The urea performs a useful function by adding to the solute concentration of the interstitial fluid and causing even more water to be reabsorbed from the filtrate. Even though most of the water has been reabsorbed from the filtrate, urine is still 95% water. The most abundant solute is urea, along with other nitrogenous wastes. There is some sodium chloride and traces of other ions such as calcium and potassium. Hydrogen ions make urine acidic, and drugs and toxins may also be present.
Okay. All right. So the key thing is this. There's a lot of reabsorption going on, making urine hyperosmotic, having a higher concentration than fluids in the human. Okay. And bottom line is that pretty much when sodium moves, water usually moves as well, unless there is something that prevents it from moving. Okay. So that's something key to understand when it comes to part of how urine is concentrated. Okay. And basically, the way it works is this. And we're going to watch a video on it to kind of explain the process.
How the human kidney concentrates urine. The kidneys of humans and other mammals can produce urine that has a higher solute concentration than the blood. Producing concentrated urine is a key adaptation that allows mammals to conserve water while eliminating wastes and any excess salt from the body. This figure illustrates how the kidney concentrates the solutes in urine. It focuses on one of the processing units of the kidney, called a nephron. A human kidney contains about 1 million nephrons. This cross-section through a kidney shows where the nephrons are located. Each kidney has an outer region of tissue, the renal cortex, which surrounds an inner region, the renal medulla. The renal cortex and renal medulla contain the nephrons, where urine is produced. Only some of the nephrons can produce highly concentrated urine. They extend deep into the renal medulla and are known as juxtamedullary nephrons. To understand how a juxtamedullary nephron concentrates urine, let's return to the simplified diagram shown in the main part of the figure. A nephron is a hollow tubule that has 4 major sections: Bowman's capsule, the proximal tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal tubule. The loop of Henle lies mostly in the renal medulla. The other 3 sections of the nephron are in the renal cortex. Each section of the nephron has a distinct function. Bowman's capsule produces a crude filtrate from the blood. The capsule encloses a ball of capillaries, and their porous walls allow the filtrate, a fluid containing water and small solutes, to move from the blood into Bowman's capsule. The filtrate moves through the proximal tubule, down the descending limb of the loop of Henle, up the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, and through the distal tubule. At the end of the distal tubule, the filtrate leaves the nephron and enters a collecting duct, which transports the filtrate to the renal pelvis. By this point, the filtrate has been processed into urine. As the filtrate moves along the nephron and collecting duct, its composition and volume change. Let's look at how that happens. In the proximal tubule, some materials are excreted while others remain in the tubule. The filtrate that enters Bowman's capsule has a solute concentration, or osmolarity, of about 300 milliosmoles per liter. This means that there are about 300 millimoles, or 300 thousandths of a mole, of total solutes per liter of solution.
Now, just to let you know, the main purpose of this video is not to give you the actual numbers and knowing 300 millimoles per liter. I'm more concerned about you knowing that the top part where the corpuscle and the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule is more dilute or less concentrated. But then as it goes down the loop of Henle, it becomes more concentrated. That's the point that I want you to get across here. Okay.
At this point, the osmolarity of the filtrate is the same as that of the blood and the interstitial fluid in the renal cortex. As the filtrate moves through the proximal tubule, both water and solutes are reabsorbed from the filtrate. As a result, the filtrate volume is reduced, but its osmolarity remains close to 300. As the filtrate leaves the proximal tubule and moves through the loop of Henle, it undergoes 2 successive stages of processing. First, water is reabsorbed from the filtrate, and then salt is reabsorbed. The epithelium of the descending limb of the loop of Henle is very permeable to water. In the interstitial fluid surrounding the loop, there's a steep gradient of osmolarity, ranging from 300 in the renal cortex to about 1200 at the bottom of the renal medulla. As the filtrate moves down the descending limb of the loop of Henle, do you think there will be a net diffusion of water from the interstitial fluid to the filtrate, a net diffusion of water from the filtrate to the interstitial fluid, or no net diffusion of water? As the filtrate moves down the descending limb of the loop of Henle, it encounters a progressive increase in osmolarity in the interstitial fluid. And because the descending limb's epithelium is very permeable to water, there's a net diffusion of water from the filtrate to the interstitial fluid. As a result, the filtrate osmolarity increases, reaching about 1200 at the bottom of the loop. As the filtrate moves up the ascending limb, salt, NaCl, moves from the filtrate to the interstitial fluid through two mechanisms: net diffusion in the thin segment of the ascending limb and active transport in the thick segment. As this is happening, water remains in the filtrate because the epithelium of the ascending limb is impermeable to water. Because the filtrate loses salt but retains water, it becomes more dilute as it moves up the ascending limb, reaching an osmolarity of about 100 by the time it enters the distal tubule. Thus, processing in the loop of Henle greatly reduces the volume of the filtrate, but has a much smaller net effect on its osmolarity. The filtrate moves through the distal tubule with little or no change in osmolarity. However, if the kidney is operating in a water-conserving mode, regulated changes in the epithelium of the collecting duct make it permeable to water. As the filtrate moves down the collecting duct, it makes a second pass through the gradient of osmolarity in the interstitial fluid. Water diffuses out of the filtrate, increasing the filtrate osmolarity. The lower portion of the collecting duct is also permeable to urea. Urea diffuses out of the filtrate here, contributing to the high osmolarity of the interstitial fluid near the bottom of the renal medulla. Together, the juxtamedullary nephrons and collecting ducts reduce a large volume of filtrate with an osmolarity the same as blood to a much smaller volume of filtrate with a higher osmolarity. In this way, the kidneys allow mammals to conserve water while eliminating excess salt, an important adaptation to life on land.
Okay. All right. So anyway, that's in general basically how the kidney works. And the juxtamedullary nephron is the most important one because the juxtamedullary nephrons have the longer loops of Henle. And mammals that inhabit dry environments have even longer ones. And the ones in freshwater have short ones because, again, freshwater, they have plenty of water, so they don't need to conserve as much water as animals that live, say, in the desert. Now, the vampire bat, this is kind of cool. So, a vampire bat actually does suck blood, but it doesn't like go and chomp into your neck and suck like, um, like a literal vampire. Basically, it scrapes the neck and then it drinks a little bit of blood from the scrape. So basically, what it does is that it alternates between producing dilute urine and concentrated urine. Okay, because it can feed on blood, and that can change the concentration of its urine. The other thing that's important to know is that mammals can control the volume and osmolarity of urine anytime salt intake and water availability are changed. And it's a combination of nervous system controls and hormonal controls that do this. So not only do they contribute to controlling blood volume, but they can actually control blood pressure as well. So antidiuretic hormone, ADH, is also called vasopressin. Now, something you need to know. Anytime you hear something called a diuresis, okay? Diuresis is urine production. So antidiuretic means less urine production. What the ADH does is that it inserts these aquaporins that increase water reabsorption in the collecting duct. If you increase water reabsorption in the collecting duct, that means it's going back into the body and being taken from the urine. It's going to concentrate the urine and help the body hold on to water. Therefore, ADH concentrates urine and helps the body hold on to water. Okay. And the hypothalamus actually monitors blood osmolarity and regulates ADH production if the body needs to hold on to water. Okay. Um, and if the osmolarity drops below a set point, so it becomes less concentrated, that means the body has enough water or even too much water, it decreases ADH secretion and leads to more dilute urine. And this is the mechanism of how it works. Also, when the body is dehydrated, the hypothalamus actually stimulates mechanisms that make you feel thirsty. Okay. So not only does it reabsorb water, but remember, you still have to have water in order to survive. So therefore, that's what stimulates thirst. And that gets the body back to a normal osmolarity. Okay. And we saw this actually. Let's see. This is okay. Effective ADH. We'll watch this video.
Hormones regulate water reabsorption by the nephron tubule in response to body fluid intake and loss. On a hot day, when you're sweaty and thirsty, blood solute concentration rises. In response, the brain signals the posterior pituitary to increase its output of the hormone ADH. ADH makes the walls of the collecting duct more permeable to water. Recall that the interstitial fluid surrounding the nephron tubule has a high solute concentration. ADH allows more water to leave the filtrate by osmosis and re-enter the blood. The body conserves water and concentrated urine is produced. When you have been drinking more water and not losing much fluid, the blood becomes more dilute. The brain responds by decreasing the secretion of ADH. The collecting duct becomes less permeable and less water is reabsorbed. The body produces dilute urine.
Okay, watch this one too.
Hormones regulate water reabsorption by the nephron tubule in response to body fluid intake and loss.
Yeah, I think it's basically the same thing. Let's stop sharing. Actually, no, that's not what I meant to do. Sorry. I meant to change the sharing. Here we go. All right. Now, alcohol is a diuretic, which means that it actually makes you pee because it inhibits ADH. That's why people who drink alcohol tend to pee a lot more. It's not because it's not because that alcohol is good for your kidneys. It's because alcohol actually dehydrates you. The other condition that involves ADH is something called diabetes insipidus. So the term diabetes means excess urine production, and diabetes insipidus is when there's a problem with ADH, either in the secretion of it, that it doesn't produce enough, or that the receptors aren't responding to ADH. And that can cause a person to basically pee out too much water. All right. Now, the other system that's important in regulating blood volume and blood pressure is called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, RAS or RAAS for short. So renin is an enzyme produced in the juxtaglomerular apparatus, which is located in the kidneys, okay, near the glomerulus. That causes angiotensin 1 to form, which then turns into angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 is a potent vasoconstrictor. Anytime you constrict blood vessels, especially arterioles, it raises blood pressure. It also stimulates the release of aldosterone, which is a hormone that increases sodium reabsorption, and along with that, water reabsorption, and also increases potassium excretion. Okay. And it turns out there's actually blood pressure medicines called ACE inhibitors. ACE stands for angiotensin converting enzyme that converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. So if you inhibit this enzyme, you inhibit angiotensin 2 production, which inhibits blood pressure and actually decreases blood pressure. It's a very common medicine used in blood pressure or to control blood pressure. Anything ending in PRIL is an ACE inhibitor. Okay. Now, if you ever hear of this hormone, atrial natriuretic peptide, actually that opposes the RAAS. It actually increases blood pressure. And what it does, oh, I'm sorry. It responds to an increase in blood volume, inhibits release of renin, so it actually decreases blood pressure. And it decreases blood volume in the process because if you lower the amount of volume of fluid in the blood, then you lower blood pressure. Let's see, we talked about thirst, we talked about these different hormones, and let's talk about kidney failure. So, two most common causes of kidney failure are diabetes and high blood pressure. Okay. Now, renal failure is basically when a kidney does not work properly to remove waste and balance fluids. It's still possible for a kidney to work, but it may not work effectively. ARF is acute renal failure, where the kidneys get damaged and they fail immediately. Fortunately, acute kidney failure can be reversed. But then there's also chronic kidney disease, or CKD, which cannot be reversed. And then to the point of where a person needs dialysis, that's called end-stage renal disease. Now, the two major types of dialysis are hemodialysis, where blood is filtered through a machine that cleans it, removes the wastes, makes sure that the right amount of water and sodium and everything is in it. And then it basically is put back into the body. And then the other type of dialysis is called peritoneal dialysis, which basically a person can actually do at home. They basically have a port in their abdomen. They put a solution there in the abdomen. It absorbs the waste, and then they draw it back out, and then they discard it. Okay. So anyway, that's it for the chapter 44 on the urinary and excretory system.